before we get into this one, I want you to picture something. A large Victorian house at the end of a quiet street in New Jersey. 19 rooms, a ballroom, marble fireplaces, stained glass ceilings. Every single light is on, day and night for weeks. No one comes in, no one goes out. The mail is stacking up on the front step.
And nobody checks on it. Not for days, not for weeks. Because the man who lived there, the quiet church-going accountant next door, had already sent letters to the school and the neighbors and the pastor, explaining that his family was visiting relatives. So people believed him because he looked like the kind of man you believed.
5 people were dead inside that house, and he had been gone for weeks.
I'm Cindy.
I'm Brian.
And this is Cold Read, where we go through true crime cases the way they deserve to be examined from the beginning. Not for shock, not for entertainment, but because understanding how this happens, understanding the psychology, the environment, the conditions, is the only way we get any closer to making sure it doesn't.
Today's case is John List, Westfield, New Jersey, November 9th, 1971. A man who murdered his entire family, 5 people, and then simply walked out the front door and became someone else for 18 years.
And the thing that keeps coming back to me every time I read about this case is that he didn't disappear into the shadows. He didn't go underground. He didn't run to another country. He went to Virginia. He went back to church. He got a job as an accountant. Again, he remarried.
He just kept going.
He just kept going.
All right, let's start at the beginning.
So the first thing you need to understand about this case is the environment it happened in. Westfield, New Jersey, in the early 1970s. This was the American suburb at its most iconic. Tree-lined streets, church communities, families built around routine, respectability, and appearances.
And that last word, appearances, that's the one that keeps coming up. Because this whole case is fundamentally about a man who was more afraid of being seen as a failure than he was of anything else, including doing what he did.
Right. And the setting matters because it provided the perfect cover. In a community where everyone performed normalcy, where the whole social contract was built on looking like you had it together, someone like John List could hide in plain sight. Not because people were naive, but because the system rewarded the performance.
That's such an important point. The pressure to maintain appearances isn't just vanity. In communities like that, it's survival, social survival. And for someone with List's psychology, and we'll get into that in detail, losing that social standing wasn't just embarrassing, it was existential.
And then there's the house.
Breeze Knoll.
Breeze Knoll, 19 rooms, a Victorian mansion at 431 Hillside Avenue, marble fireplaces, a grand ballroom, a stained glass skylight in the ceiling that was later appraised as a genuine signed Tiffany original, worth over $100,000.
Which becomes one of the most grotesque ironies in the entire case, but we'll get there.
People who grew up in Westfield have talked about that house in interviews over the years. Even before the murders, they remember it as feeling off, too large, too quiet for a family with 3 kids, too still.
Like the house itself was already holding its breath.
Exactly like that.
So, who was John List before November 1971? On paper, genuinely, impressively ordinary. Born in 1925 in Bay City, Michigan. Strict German-American Lutheran household. Father was demanding. Emotional expression was not encouraged. He served in the military during World War II. Earned a bachelor's in business administration, then a master's in accounting from the University of Michigan.
Sunday school teacher, Boy Scout troop leader, married Helen in 1951. 3 kids, Patricia, John Jr., Frederick. His elderly mother Alma lived with them in the mansion. He was a vice president and comptroller at a bank in Jersey City.
He ticked every box, every single one.
And I think that's where the psychological profile starts, honestly. Because what we're describing isn't just a resume, it's an identity built entirely on external markers. His sense of self was completely constructed around performing those roles. Provider, father, churchman, respectable professional.
Which means, and this is crucial, when those roles started to collapse, there was nothing underneath them. There was no inner life to fall back on, no capacity to say, I've failed at some things and I'm still okay, because he'd never built that. Dr. Richard Walter, the criminal psychologist who later worked on Catching List, described him as a type 2 family annihilator. Not rage-driven, control-driven. That distinction is everything in this case.
Can you explain that distinction for people who might not know it?
Yeah. So, a rage-driven family annihilator, that's someone who snaps. The violence is impulsive, chaotic, usually triggered by a specific event, an argument, a confrontation. A control-driven family annihilator is different. The violence is planned, methodical. It's not about losing control, it's about reasserting it. And everything List did before, during, and after the murders fits that second category perfectly.
It's actually terrifying how much it fits. Because if he'd been rage-driven, maybe someone would have seen it coming. Maybe there would have been a warning.
But there wasn't.
There wasn't. So let's talk about what was actually happening inside Breeze Knoll in the months before the murders. Because by 1971, the whole structure was caving in, and not a single person outside the household knew.
List had quietly lost his job. We don't know the exact date it happened, but sometime in 1971, he was let go from the bank, and he didn't tell anyone, not Helen, not the kids, not Alma.
Every single morning, he put on his suit, picked up his briefcase, kissed the family goodbye, drove away. And then he sat in the Westfield train station, reading his newspaper, waiting for the day to pass.
That image I find that almost impossible to sit with. Because it's not just deception, it's a performance with no audience. He's doing it even when no one is watching.
Which tells you everything about how locked in he was. He didn't know how to exist outside the role. To pay the mortgage, he started secretly transferring money from his mother's bank accounts. Alma was 84 years old, living in the house, completely dependent on him. He was draining her savings to maintain a life he'd already lost.
And here's the thing that really gets me. He had options. Helen didn't know the finances were in freefall. He could have told her, they could have made decisions together, sold the house, downsized, moved. But the option that required him to be seen as failing, that was the option that didn't exist for him.
Right. Because that would have required him to be a person, and not just a performance of a person.
And then there's the Tiffany skylight.
Oh God, tell them.
The stained glass ceiling in the ballroom of Breeze Knoll was later identified as a genuine, signed Tiffany, appraised at over $100,000 in 1970s money. The house that was crushing him financially had a $100,000 window in the ceiling. If he had simply sold it, just that one asset, it would have covered the debt.
Instead, the mansion burned down in an unsolved arson less than a year after the murders, and the skylight burned with it.
So not only did 5 people die over a financial crisis that didn't have to be fatal, the asset that could have resolved it was destroyed too.
That's not irony anymore, that's just tragedy.
We need to go through this carefully, because the sequence of events on November 9th is important for understanding who John List was psychologically. It wasn't chaotic, it wasn't frenzied, it followed a plan.
The morning started normally. The kids left for school. Helen was in the kitchen, and John List went to retrieve 2 guns, his own 9mm Steyr semi-automatic, and separately, his father's Colt .22 caliber revolver.
2 different weapons for 2 different victims. That alone tells you how deliberate this was.
He shot Helen first, in the kitchen, in the side of the head.
Then he walked upstairs to the 3rd floor into Alma's apartment and shot his 84-year-old mother above the left eye as she lay in bed. He used the Colt for her, his father's gun. We don't know what that means, but it doesn't feel like nothing.
Then he waited. In that house, with 2 people already dead. He waited for the children to come home.
Patricia came home, then Frederick. Both were killed shortly after walking through the front door of their own house.
And then, and this is the part I genuinely struggle to get through, John List got in his car and drove to his son's soccer game.
John Jr. was 15, athletic. He'd been looking forward to this game, and his father stood on the sideline and watched, like any ordinary dad on a Tuesday afternoon.
Then gave him a ride home and killed him. Investigators later believed John Jr. fought back. He was shot more times than anyone else in the house.
I've been doing this show for a while now, and that detail in the soccer game, I keep coming back to it. Because it's not just about planning, it's about the complete compartmentalization of emotional reality.
He wasn't dissociating. He wasn't in a fugue state. He knew exactly what he had done and what he was about to do, and he still stood on those sidelines and cheered. After the last murder, List did something that no one who reads about this case ever forgets.
He moved the bodies. One by one, he carried or dragged the bodies of Helen and the 3 children down to the ballroom. He laid them out on sleeping bags, positioned carefully, some partially covered with blankets. He left Alma upstairs. He wrote in his letter later that he couldn't carry her down alone.
And then he turned on the intercom system and tuned it to a religious station playing organ hymns, which played on a continuous loop through the empty mansion for nearly 6 weeks.
An investigator who worked the case later said it didn't look like a crime scene. It looked like someone had, their exact words were, closed down a family.
Which is so precise it's almost unbearable to hear.
Because that's exactly what he did. He didn't lose control. He administered the end of this family's existence. The arrangement wasn't about guilt, it wasn't grief, it was procedure.
And underneath that stained glass ceiling worth $100,000, the family he could have saved by simply selling one window. Before he left, John List sat down and wrote
5 pages to his pastor, Reverend Eugene Rehwinkel, single-spaced, methodical, organized the way a balance sheet is organized. It is one of the most chilling documents in American true crime history, and also one of the most revealing.
What does he say?
He starts with the finances. He's on the verge of bankruptcy. He's depleted his mother's savings. He sees no path forward that doesn't end in poverty and humiliation for the family. Then he gets to Helen. He writes about her alcoholism. And then he discloses something that shocked investigators. Helen had untreated tertiary syphilis. Contracted from her first husband before she met List. She had concealed it from him for their entire marriage. By 1971, it had progressed to late-stage neurological damage.
Which raises a whole other dimension to what was happening in that house.
Then he writes about the children. Patricia's acting in school, plays exposed her to sinful influences. He feared all 3 kids were drifting from God. His conclusion, by killing them now, while they were still relatively innocent, he was ensuring their souls reached heaven. It was, in his framing, an act of mercy.
And I want to stop here for a second, because I think the religious dimension of this case is often either oversimplified or underexamined. It gets framed as religious fanaticism drove him to murder. But I don't think that's right.
No, it's more insidious than that. Religion didn't cause John List to kill his family. Religion gave him a framework to make himself the hero of his own crime. He didn't kill them in a fit of divine compulsion. He planned it over months. He staged a getaway. He built a new identity. A man acting on genuine religious delusion doesn't then spend 18 years enjoying his new life in Virginia.
Right. The religious framing was self-serving, convenient. It was the one framing that let him keep his self-image intact. I'm not a murderer. I'm a father who made a terrible sacrifice.
And there's one final thing he did before he left the house. He went through every family photograph and cut his own face out of each one.
Only his face, not theirs, his.
That's not grief. That's not remorse. That's a man erasing himself from a life he was done with.
So let's talk about the escape, because this is where the case goes from horrifying to almost incomprehensible. John List drove to JFK Airport and abandoned his car in long-term parking. No record of him boarding a flight. It was misdirection. He took a bus, then a train. First to Michigan, then Denver, Colorado.
In Denver, he assumed the identity of Robert Peter Clark, used the name of a college acquaintance. He applied for a Social Security card, found work as a short-order cook, then gradually rebuilt his career in accounting. He joined a Lutheran church. He ran a carpool for elderly congregation members.
And in 1985, 14 years after the murders, he married a woman named Dolores Miller, an Army PX clerk who had no idea who she was marrying. They eventually relocated to Richmond, Virginia, where he worked at an accounting firm.
He went to church every Sunday in Richmond. He was polite to his neighbors, good at his job, the quiet man at the end of the street.
Dolores Miller Clark had no idea. None.
What this escape period tells us, psychologically, is something really important. He wasn't racked with guilt, he wasn't haunted, he wasn't trying to atone, he was fine.
He rebuilt the exact same life, same profession, same church, same conservative routines. He didn't change who he was. He just changed what he was called.
Because in his mind, and this is the darkest reading of this case, he hadn't done something wrong. He had made a decision, resolved a problem, and moved on. The letter to the pastor was the receipt. The job was done.
God.
Yeah. Okay, so now we get to 1988. 17 years have passed. The case is ice cold. Every photograph of John List has been destroyed, some by his own hand, the rest in the Breeze Knoll fire. Wanted posters went out across the US, even into West Germany, given his German language fluency. Nothing.
Detective Bernard Tracy of the Westfield PD had been working this case for over a decade, and he brought it to America's Most Wanted. The producers were skeptical. Case is too old, they said. He's probably dead. Tracy pushed.
And when they finally agreed to run the segment, they hit an immediate wall. No photographs, so they hired forensic sculptor Frank Bender.
Tell me about Bender, because I think he deserves more than a footnote here.
Frank Bender was genuinely one of the most remarkable figures in forensic history. He didn't just age faces, he built psychological portraits in clay. For the List case, he partnered with criminal psychologist Dr. Richard Walter. And before Bender touched a single piece of clay, Walter worked out who Robert Clark had become.
How?
By understanding who John List was, his compulsive need for routine, his rigid religious beliefs, which Walter said made plastic surgery almost impossible psychologically. He wouldn't have been able to alter himself physically. It would have felt like vanity, like sin. His pattern of recreating identical environments, same job, same church, same social structure. Walter concluded he hadn't gone far. He'd rebuilt the same life nearby.
So the bust wasn't just an aged photograph. It was a psychological prediction.
Exactly. Bender added the weight of a sedentary life. The deeper lines, the receding hairline, and then, for the glasses, he went to thrift stores. He bought frames until he found the ones a man like John List would choose. Thick, conservative, forgettable.
The show aired on May 21st, 1989. 350 people called in.
One of those callers was someone who knew Bob Clark from Richmond.
And on June 1st, 1989, 18 years, 6 months, and 22 days after the murders, FBI agents walked into an accounting office in Richmond, Virginia.
He was wearing the exact style of glasses Frank Bender had chosen at a thrift store.
He denied it at first, maintained the fiction even as the fingerprints were processed. A prison guard later overheard him finally tell Dolores the truth. The trial was in 1990. List admitted to the killings. His defense argued diminished capacity, depression, obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, possible long-term PTSD from his military service, which the jury rejected.
Completely, because the prosecution laid out the planning. He purchased weapons in advance, he organized the bodies, he managed the mail and the school absence. He wrote a 5-page administrative letter explaining his actions. He built a false identity and maintained it for 18 years.
That is not diminished capacity. That is extraordinary capacity. 5 counts of first-degree murder, 5 consecutive life sentences, ineligible for parole for 125 years.
In 2002, he gave his first public interview to Connie Chung.
And it is something.
He said he regretted the murders. He hoped to be reunited with his family in heaven. When Chung asked why he hadn't taken his own life instead of theirs, he said suicide would have barred him from heaven.
So in his framework, in the story he told himself, they all went to heaven together, and he just had to serve out his time here first. And then they'd be a family again.
He never expressed remorse for his victims as individuals, as people, as his children. It was always framed in spiritual logistics.
He died in prison on March 21st, 2008. Pneumonia, age 82, an unmarked grave. He erased himself from the family photographs, and then spent the rest of his life insisting he had done it out of love. So we always end with this question on Cold Read. What does this case leave us with? What are we supposed to do with John List?
I think the honest answer is there's no satisfying resolution to this one. Because the thing that makes the List case so persistent, so unresolved in the collective memory, is that it destroys the thing we rely on most. The idea that we can recognize danger when it comes.
He had no criminal history, no public breakdown, no obvious warning signs. He was educated, disciplined, religious, polite. He was exactly who he appeared to be on the surface.
And that surface was entirely hollow.
I think about Helen a lot, and Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick. They were living inside his crisis, and they didn't even know it. They were the most proximate people to everything that was falling apart. And he protected the secret from them more carefully than he protected them.
Because they were part of the image he couldn't afford to damage, not people he needed to protect, pieces of an identity he needed to maintain.
Until the identity became more important than the people. Helen, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick List are buried at Fairview Cemetery in Westfield, New Jersey. Alma was returned to Frankenmuth, Michigan, to St. Lawrence Lutheran Cemetery, the church John List claimed to be killing for.
The house at 431 Hillside Avenue has been rebuilt, sold multiple times. The address has changed, the Tiffany skylight is ash. And somewhere in New Jersey, people who were children in 1971 still remember being warned to stay away from that block.
Because the most frightening truth of the John List case is not that a monster lived among us.
It's that no one knew.
I'm Cindy.
I'm Brian.
This has been The Cold Read.
If this episode stayed with you, it should. Please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who takes these things seriously.
We'll see you next week.